So what we're going to talk about today is how to start your websites in Adobe Muse. It's a lot of information right up front. It's one of those things that I don't know. It's pretty intuitive. You know, coming from a coding background myself, and being able to code websites, and then it probably took me longer to learn Muse than it will, most people, because most people don't know how to code. So there were things that I wanted to do, and it's like, I just want to do this, and it wouldn't do it, and then it took me, a lot of time to figure it out. And there's other things that it does that are so intuitive and make it so easy to do some really cool special effects, like scrolling effects and stuff like that, that honestly I was very impressed. So it's really cool, and I can easily see how you could develop a big website by laying it all out in Muse, exporting it, bringing it into Dreamweaver, and then start adding your own code in Dreamweaver and doing some really pretty cool stuff. So anyway, let's just, here's the master that I've built so far, and I'm going to rebuild this with you guys right now in a separate master. But before we do that, let's just preview the master in the browser, preview the page in the browser. It's going to export it and open up Google Chrome here. And let me make this a little bigger. You can see it's a responsive design. Okay, it's going to respond to the different browser widths and heights. And it does some nice special effects there with the menu bar and everything. This is barely readable. The Weisbrod tease is barely readable, so I'm going to have to figure that out a little bit more. It's more a function of the background photograph that I chose is maybe not the best. So, that's where I could probably just change that mostly with the background photograph. But, it's a t-shirt website, right? So I've got this guy wearing a nice t-shirt. Well, it's a button down, but that's okay. And then here I've got a rainbow of colors. And then here I have a footer. I could even do another photograph or whatever. And you can see I've actually got a nice subtle little rollover on the menu bar. And then at the top, when you scroll at the top, the menu bar is not black. But then as you scroll down, it fades in, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we've got we've got some good stuff set up. I'm going to show you how to do not all of this actually. I'm going to break this up into a couple different demos, but just how to lay it out, how to set it up and lay it out. So let's go back to Muse, and I'm going to close this master, and I'm going to make a new one. Okay, and we're just going to start with a lot of the same elements and go from there. So the first thing, when I double click the master, and we went over this a little bit in the previous demo, but you've got your header area here and you've got your footer area here. And the bottom line here kind of designates the bottom of the header, and then you've also got the bottom of the footer and the top of the footer. Now, the other line here says top of page. That's a little weird. You might think, well, what happens if I stretch that down? Well, probably the best thing for me to do to show it to you is in the masters here. So if I take this top of page down like this, pay careful note to this building right here. So then if I save that and I go back and preview that page in the browser, you'll notice now it bumps the photograph down. Now it didn't bump the menus down because I actually pinned those to the top of the page. But that's a way that you could basically give yourself a little bit of a margin up top or a little bit of space up top. If you wanted everything below it, you could do something like that. And that's up to you. That I personally don't like that very much, so I'm going to undo that. We're back to the way we were before. So let's go back to this new master that I've created. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is kind of set up what you want your page to look like. Now, we're building our landing page or our home page right now. And the trend right now, and I love it, I love the look, is pages with a large photographic quality, look with usually the photograph is full page or almost full page, and it might have a little down arrow here, and then you scroll down, there's content, maybe some thumbnails, some pictures of some t-shirts with a click to buy button on them that takes you straight to the shopping cart. Then another graphic. I'm not a huge fan of this photograph, but it makes sense, so I put it in there. Then a little bit more content, maybe custom designs, maybe a contact button or something, you know, just some more graphics here. And then at the bottom is our footer, and our footer will always have the address of the business, a phone number where you can reach people, email address, and sometimes even what we call a sitemap, which is basically all the pages, you know, on the site. That depends, but the cool thing is your footer is something that you can totally set up. You can totally work on that on your own, and there's actually a way you can build a separate master just for your footer, which is actually really handy, and I can show you how to do that later, so that your footer is always the same, that sort of stuff. But that's basically the anatomy of essentially a modern website, at least the way the trends are today. So, how do we start laying this out? Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is find a photograph. I literally went online and searched, I think I searched New York City portraits to find some photographs of some people with t-shirts on or whatever. If this was a real business and I wasn't doing a demo, I would be hiring a photographer and getting a model and getting my line of t-shirts out, and I'd have them do a modeling shoot with a couple t-shirts or whatever. You know, to be honest with you, since my website's advertising men's, women's, and kids, honestly, I'd probably do the, you know, a guy, a woman, and a kid in the photograph. They'd look like a family, but they'd each be wearing the t-shirts that I was selling, and that would make a really great landing page. You know, really nice. Here's what we're doing. It's fun. They're walking in New York City on a sidewalk, and they're laughing or something like that, and I'm just very, you know, not so subtly, you know, saying my t-shirts are fun, you should buy them. That's basically what a website is, right? You should buy this. You should buy this thing. There you go. So that's what I would do. But this photograph suffices really well. Maybe this would be a better one for the men's section only, you know, and then for a landing page, like I said, have a guy, a woman, and a child, you know, somehow, so it's really showing that I'm selling all three things. Whatever. It is important to think that way, but for the purposes of this demo, here we go. So we're going to start with this photograph. So I'm going to go to my new master, and I'm going to go over here to the toolbar, and over in this toolbar you've got you know, a bunch of tools which to Adobe people should, you know, look pretty familiar. You've got your selection tool, you've got a crop tool, you've got a text tool, you've got a rectangle tool, a frame tool, a hand tool, zoom. That's an anchor place thing. Won't worry about that. And then there's colors and fonts and all sorts of other stuff. So we're going to start with our rectangle tool. So I'm just going to take this rectangle tool and I'm going to stretch it out like this, okay? And I'm going to put it all the way across the page. And then up here on the left, you'll see we've got a whole, or actually along the top, you'll see we have a whole ton of options just for this shape. We can change its size. We can change the pin, which means like where it is in positioning on the page. We can do all sorts of stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to click on the fill. And in here, I can give it a color. Okay, so I can make it blue or green or whatever. Or instead of a color here, I can click Add Image. So I'm going to click the Add Image. I'm going to get my New York City portrait of our guy, and I'm going to click Open. Now, we have a couple of different options for how this image is going to fill the box. And this is really important. So please pay attention here. Right here under the fitting, right now it's set to original size. Now that looks okay here, but if I save this really quickly and I go and preview it in the browser, you're going to notice that it's actually not so hot. The photograph is not filling the page like I want to, and as I resize, it's not really being very responsive. This is for two reasons, believe it or not. Reason number one is actually because we haven't set the container, the rectangle, to be responsive to the website width. So the first thing I want to do is click on the rectangle, and up here it's going to say resize, and I'm going to say stretch to browser width. Now it's going to actually stretch to the width of the browser as I resize it. We can see that by putting, let's put a black stroke around the frame. I'll bump that up to 2. Save. And now let's go back and preview again. And you can see how the frame is stretching, but look at my photograph. It's actually not big enough. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to set how the photograph, gentlemen, stop. We want to set how the photograph fills our rectangle. So we're going to click here, and under fitting, I now have a couple other options. Number 1, scale to fit. We'll start with that. This is also not a good option for what we want, but I'll show you how it works. So I'm going to hit save, and if I go back and preview in the browser, you'll see that he's fitting the content, but only with the shortest side. So he's not filling the content, he's fitting it. So what we want to do, I should close that. So what we want to do is click here, go back to our fill, and we want to say scale to fill. Now this is most of the time. I'm showing you what all these do because you might not want that. It depends. It depends on your photograph. The other thing, before I check that, is notice the positioning. You can see there's a little dot that's been clicked up in the top left-hand corner. What we want to do is that little dot is telling it to be up in the top left. If I click top center, it's going to be like this. If I click center center, it won't change much, but it would if this were changing scale and size. We really probably want top center. And then we're going to check scale to fill. And now it's going to fill side to side and keep the image directly in the center of the rectangle. And you can see, whoops, so save, and then I will export it. And now you can kind of see how it responds to the changes in the browser size, which is really what we want. The big problem we have now is this isn't big enough. Okay, the idea of a landing page is we want something impressive, we want something big, that's the style. So I'm going to bring this box down a whole lot more until I see that I think I wanted about 80% of the height of this browser window. Okay, so now I'm just going to keep that there, going to go back, and I'm just going to start scaling it down. And as I do that, you'll see it starts to move the page a little bit. And I'm just going to start, I'm going to go to about there. It looks like it's a little extreme, but believe it or not, it's probably not. Save, Shift, and E, and now you see it's still not quite. Now some of you may be going, Mr. Weisberg, why isn't it taking up the height that I expect it to? Well, part of that reason is because the browser width is so wide here, okay? As opposed, and the pixels aren't quite as tall as it looks like it is here, okay? If you look up top, it says 960 pixels. That's the standard width for a website. So it's designing this based on a 960 pixel width. Guess what? We're not at 960 pixels. This is a 1080p monitor, so I'm designing this at 1920. That's almost double. That's almost double the width. So I kind of have to keep that in mind and make this a lot taller than I expect. Now the problem with this is you don't know what monitor some people are going to be looking at your website with. So it's very difficult. We're building a responsive website. Adobe Muse is going to do that for you. But even still, you can't control what people are going to look at your website with. So it's kind of tough. Now, see, that one went a little too far. Okay? So let's go back, and let's bring it up to about here, I'm thinking. There. Now that looks pretty good. So we have just a little bit of white space at the bottom, and I'm going to get rid of this black line that we have around our rectangular division here, and we should be good to go. So just take the stroke to 0 or nothing. All right, now we've got that. So now we're ready to add our logo. Well, actually, I like to add the logo towards the end, and you'll see why. Well, let's do it now. Actually, let's do it now. So, and because I want to make a mistake on purpose. So I'm going to add my logo now up in the header. Headers generally run around 75 to about 100 pixels tall. So I'm going to set this to 100 just to start with. I can adjust the size as I want to. Now I'm going to go grab my logo, which is an Illustrator file. And what's cool about this is I just insert the Illustrator file directly. I don't have to make it into a graphic, which is really cool. So I'm going to say File and Place. I'm going to go to the logo, and it's going to take a second to load in here off the server, but there it is, and it's going to ask me where I want it. So I'm just going to click it here, and it comes in really big. The first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that the width and height is locked. So you can see there's a little chain here. I'm going to lock that, and that will allow me to resize it without breaking it and squishing it. I have found that if that lock is not connected, you know, I can, whoops, now it's not going to let me, of course. I can't squish it. If I hold the Shift key down, it's like the Shift key makes it squishable. Yeah, so it's kind of the opposite as normal. So in Photoshop, you hold the Shift key down to not squish things. In Muse, if you hold the Shift key down, it does squish things. And then if I undo that, without the Shift key held, it won't allow me to squish it. So that's a little counterintuitive if you've been using Adobe for a while. I actually really despise that about this program, but, well, hey, I didn't make it, so whatever. So there's our logo. Now I'm going to bring in a menu. So I'm just going to go over to my widgets library, and I'm going to bring in a simple horizontal menu. We're not going to do any formatting to it. We're just going to bring that in and drop it down here. And you'll notice that it automatically populates the menu with items from my planner. So it's doing home, men's, women's, and kids, which is really cool that it does that automatically like this. So now we've kind of got this set up, and we're ready to go. The other thing is I'm going to add some text. So I'm going to click on the text tool. I'm going to click and draw a text box here, and I'm just going to type in, I'm going to put caps lock on, Weisbrod's T's, whoops, test, Weisbrod's test. Now I can change the font size. I kind of like Arial. Let's bump it up a little bit here, and if you go beyond the text box, it's kind of cool. It actually like resizes it for you, which I like. That's pretty cool. I can change it to white. Whoops, I got to click on the text. So you got to be on the text tool. I can change my font to white, which I kind of like because then it matches my logo, but you're never going to read it. So one of the things that you can do is I can click on it, and there's an effects button here, and I'm going to check shadow on there, and I'm going to make it a little, 50% is probably good. I'm going to take the blur down a little bit and the distance down a little bit so it's right under the text, and then that should be a little bit more readable. See, it's a little bit more readable against the white photograph. And then I'll do the black bar later. I'll show you how we do that. So now let's save this and let's preview. Okay, so there we go. Looking pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty good, definitely. So now we're ready to add our content towards the bottom, and it's really just basically more of the same. Let me close some of these previews. Every time you hit preview, it opens a new master, or opens a new tab. So that's a little frustrating. So let's go back here. Now, in order to create more of the same, I'm going to grab a rectangle tool, and I'm just going to start down here, and I'm going to, whoops, that didn't work. It's kind of weird if you draw off the page, it's like it doesn't want to do it. So I'm going to draw on the page like this. And then I'm going to fill it with white. Sometimes I'll fill them with colors just so I can kind of keep track of stuff, especially if I'm using white because of the way that the background's already set to white as a default, but that's okay. So now I'm going to set this. This is my content area, and I'm going to set this to 575 pixels or so. You know, I mean, you can play with it again, 575. And then I'm going to also set the resize to stretch to the browser width, okay? And I'm going to bring it just a little bit over the photograph so there's just a touch of overlap. And now we're ready to do our second photograph. So I'm going to do something very similar. Another rectangle. And I'm just going to grab that and grab the rectangle. Going to set it like this. Click the resize, stretch to browser width. It snaps to the browser width for me. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit the fill. And I'm going to add an image. And there's our t-shirts with a nice photograph there. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. But this time I'm going to position it in the center and scale to fit. Now, one of the problems is when I grab or when I add a new rectangle, that rectangle comes in over top of the first one that I added. So every time you add an object, it comes in over top. This one, because we're going to have the scrolling effect on it, I want it to actually be underneath. So I'm going to right click, just like in Illustrator, arrange, send backward. And now you can see it's underneath the already existing rectangle. And now I'm going to take this and we're going to add another one. So I'm just going to alt drag. I get a second one. And you can see again as I drag down, the website is, Muse is responding and understanding that I need more space. And now we've got that. And now we're ready to do our footer. So I'm just going to take, and actually I can be lazy and just drag it, but it's okay. I'll just make a new one like this. And let's just fill it with a funky color right now. Let's just fill it with red. That's horrible, but we'll just do it. And again, resize, stretch to browser width. And I'm going to bring it down into here. I'm going to bring it all the way down. And I'm going to resize it to the footer that I've got there. Actually, I kind of like a little bit bigger footer. So take this, and I'm going to bring my footer up to the top of the box that I just built. And now I've got a footer. So now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I want my footer to be the same blue as my logo. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the logo, right-click, and I'm going to open the original, just like this. Now I can click on the T, I can double-click on the color, and right here is a code. Right next to the hashtag, there's a code. I'm going to Control-C, copy that. Cancel, close without doing anything, go back into Muse, go down to the rectangle, click the fill, and here's the hashtag. I can paste that in, and now I've got the exact same blue as what's in my logo. So now, let's just take a look at what we've got, and then we'll just kind of see how things are going here. So save and preview. Not too shabby. So the first thing that I'm noticing is very similar to the problem we were having with the first photograph. This photograph here is really skinny. It's much smaller this way, and that's again because when I'm working in Muse, I'm working at a typical 960 pixels width. If you want to see what that is based upon the browser, you'll notice from here to the edge of the t-shirt to the edge of the menu, that's about 960 pixels. Okay, so my browser is much wider than that, and so the sizing to my eyes is off because the width to height ratio is different. So I'm just going to go back down here, and now we've got to do some work. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to move them down quite a bit. I can zoom back, control minus, and now I'm going to take this guy and make him, I don't know, what's this one? This one was 860 pixels. So if I want to make that probably a little bit less, so maybe 750. So it's not quite as tall as the header photograph there, the landing page, but it's going to be a little taller. And then I'll shift click on both of these and bring them up so that they're back up and touching that. And then, oh, something happened there. Oh, that's interesting. So now I lost the bottom of the page. So we'll just take the bottom of the page and line that right back up with our thing. And unfortunately, okay, there's our footer again. So lost the footer too. Kind of weird. All right. So there we go. So now let's hit save and go back and preview. You're going to be going back and forth a ton. So that's 750 pixels. So it's still pretty skinny compared to our main photograph of our guy, but I think that looks pretty good. Okay? So lastly, let's pin our logo and our title and our menu to the top. Just going to show you how to do that, and then that'll be enough for today. And then I'll do a separate demo on how we do those scrolling effects where they kind of like, you know, stay in place or they scroll at different speeds and stuff like that. So what we want to do is when you are positioning an object, you have the ability to pin it. So if I zoom in here, okay, I can click on an object, and over here there's pinning stuff. And if I click the pin, you'll see it shows you. One is pin to browser or pin to page. So if I pin something to the page, that means it'll scroll with the page. But if I pin something to the browser, that means it stays in that location on the browser. So I want it to pin the browser to the top, and I'm going to hit center, because even though it's not in the center, I want the whole design to stay centered. If I hit left, then it should spread out. So let's do that on purpose and see what happens. So I just made a mistake on purpose, and now you can see my logo has pushed all the way over to the left and is now no longer attached to my, my title. So if I want this to be a little bit more centrally located, which I do, we'll go back, and instead of pinning it to the left, we'll pin it to the center, okay? And do the same thing for all of them. Boom. In fact, you don't even have to click on this. You can just click on the icon there. So I'll click on the menu, and there's the pin, and I'm going to pin it centered there. Save. And now, when I scroll, you'll notice that they stay in the same place. Oh, stink. What just happened? What's happening? It's not going away, it's going behind it. Yeah. Remember I said I would, remember just about 10 minutes ago I said I usually like to make my logos last, and then I said, oh, no, I'll make them now and I'll make a mistake on purpose for you. That's it right there. Remember, objects are arranged in the order that you create them. So I created the photograph, then I created my logo and my menus. So then I created this white text box. So they're going behind the white text box because that is actually technically above them. So that's very simple to solve. I'm just going to click on all three of these, right click, and I'm going to arrange, bring to front. And now save, preview in browser, and now it's going to do what I want it to do, okay, and keep them there. And then I'll add the black bar that fades in when you scroll and all that other stuff later, but you see how I'm starting to build this page. Does this make sense to everybody? I honestly have to say I'm really starting to love Muse. I really am loving it. It's got some really neat stuff about it, and for me, if I was doing a small business website without a ton of product, or you know, like you know, more of an introduction, like let's say I was a law firm or something and I had a few principal lawyers who were all partners, maybe 4 or 5 partners, and wanted to give a couple case examples and then have a contact form and some basic information. Muse would be perfect for that kind of thing. It's so easy to build, it's so easy to set it up. I'm actually really starting to like it a lot, okay? So that's basically it. That's where I want you to be, is in Muse, creating your masters and starting. Now, one last thing. You'll notice, and I'm only going to do this because I don't want you to make a mistake. You'll notice that I am not putting text in here. I'm not putting pictures of T-shirts in here and populating this with content. I'm only doing backgrounds and logos and stuff. The reason for that is because this is my master. If I want to do that sort of stuff, I need to do that on the page itself. So if I actually wanted to do this, you can see here, I could go in and now I could grab and add a picture of, let's say, a t-shirt that I was selling, okay? I'll just make it red, okay? So I'll just fill it with a red background, and there's a t-shirt that I'm selling, okay? And then have another one, and then I could add some text. You want to do that on the page itself, not on the masters. Does that make sense to everybody? The masters is for backgrounds, menus, things that stay the same for every page. So that once you start, it's good to get that, because if you start building a master for your product pages, let's say, okay, you've got all your t-shirts here. If you start putting stuff on the master, then every page will have that same item on there. That's probably not what you want, right? So it's good to be careful and very mindful of what you're doing and how you're building things and what content you're putting where. We got it? You think we got it? I think we got it.